If we've not had an opportunity to meet, I am Pastor Mark, and I'm so excited to be continuing a brand new series that we started last Sunday called Timeless Wisdom for Troubled Times. And if you weren't here last week, that's okay. You're still going to get a lot of wisdom, hopefully, out of this message, and you can always go back and either watch the full service, the live stream, either on Facebook or on YouTube, or if you're a little busy and you just want to grab the message, we clip that and you can just watch the message through video as well, through my YouTube channel, or through audio with the podcast. But today we're going to continue that series, which focuses on practical wisdom that will help us to experience the fullness of life. Last week we talked about how all of our decisions are connected, how what we do today affects our tomorrow. And not just our tomorrow, but the tomorrow of others, including those that we love the most. And most of us have lived long enough to make some really good decisions and also some really bad decisions. And if we are willing to learn from the consequences of our actions, we can become more skilled at accomplishing our goals and living a good life without regret. By reflecting on the interconnectedness of our decisions, we arrived at the first principle of wisdom, which is this: don't sacrifice what you really want for what you want right now. If you've got a good memory, I want you to say that with me. Don't sacrifice what you really want for what you want right now. And today, the principle that we will consider can be captured by one word: listen. You guys say that with me. Listen. As Judge Judy says, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, because it is often wiser to listen than to talk, or at least to listen carefully before we talk. And depending on your personality, this will come easier for some than others. I confess it is not easy for me. And when I say listen, I'm not talking about listening to things that we like to hear. I mean, nobody needs to admonish us to do that, right? I mean, Emma never has to say, Mark, you better get down to the surf shop and buy that new surfboard right now or else. Or you better remember that your way of loading the dishwasher is the only right way. Or you better not apologize because it was all my fault. Right? Confirmation bias does not require mature listening. Are you awake, church? Confirmation bias does not require mature listening skills. It's easy to hear what we already think. No one needs to advise us to do this. In contrast, I'm talking about listening to things that we don't want to hear, but that we need to hear. Can we pause before rebutting, uncross our arms, drop our defenses, and simply listen? This is today's advice, and it's part of what it means to be a mature adult. The benefit of accepting this piece of advice is that when we are willing to listen to what we don't want to hear, it keeps us ahead of the pack and out of trouble. It ensures that we will write a story with the way that we live our lives that we are proud to tell our children and grandchildren. But it's important for us to talk about it specifically because it's not natural. It's not easy. What is natural is to get people to tell us what we want to hear. In fact, we are often drawn to these kinds of people. We gravitate toward them because when they tell us what we want to hear, it makes us feel smart, secure, competent, successful, and liked. But when people challenge us, and when they tell us things that we don't want to hear, we often get defensive, judgmental, and angry. And we either tell ourselves or other people behind closed doors terrible things about them. But here's the bigger problem. Refusing to listen to what we don't want to hear is a gateway decision. Just think about it. The biggest regrets of our lives are probably preceded by a decision to not listen. Refusing to listen was a gateway to doing something that you would give anything to go back and undo. That relationship, that failed marriage, that weekend, that investment, that blow up, whatever it was probably preceded by a decision not to listen. Remember, last Sunday we said that some of our biggest regrets are preceded not by a single failure, but by a series of bad decisions. And not listening is often the very first step in that series of bad decisions that lead to regret. Again, it's a gateway decision. And what's crazy is that we already know this because we've been on the other side of it, right? I mean, we've seen a loved one or a friend heading toward a really bad decision, and we've thrown ourselves in front of them, and we've said, hold on, you don't want to do this, you're going to regret it, but they refuse to listen. You predict their future, you tell them what's going to happen if they continue down that road, but they can't see it, and they just plow full steam ahead toward the disaster. So from the outside looking in, things are clear, but from the inside looking out, there are some things we just can't see, especially when we are talking about relationships, money, or politics, because these three are not emotionally neutral topics. All of us have blind spots. All of us have the capacity to lie to ourselves. And all of us have the capacity to be triggered by emotions that can lead to compulsive reactions as opposed to thoughtful decisions. And these are a few reasons why it's so important to listen to people outside of yourself. When you are in the middle of a challenging situation, there are things that you cannot see. However, there are also people out there who know you and love you, at least enough to offer a different perspective, which may help you to avoid a bad decision. But you must be willing to listen. Even if that other person doesn't have all the answers, and they usually won't, just having an honest and open conversation in which you listen to things that you don't want to hear might be exactly what you need to figure some things out and to avoid regret. So the foolish person says, "It's my life, I don't need your input, leave me alone, butt out." In contrast, the wise person has enough self-control to pause, to uncross their arms, and to say, "I really don't want to hear this, but I need you to be honest and tell me how it really is." And when you're listening, it's very important to pay attention to the tension. I want to say that again. Pay attention to the tension and ask yourself, what is really going on here? Why am I resisting so much? You guys know that saying, "He who protesteth much," right? Why am I being so resistant? Why is this so triggering to me? Why are my feelings so intense? Is my reaction proportionate to this specific situation? And if not, if my emotional response is so overwhelming that it's disproportionate, what is this triggering from my past? What brokenness is this poking? that's making me so agitated? Why am I so angry? Why am I so afraid? What is going on inside of me? And when we are reflecting on this tension, it is wise to seek trusted counsel and to listen. You don't have to do it by yourself. And we see this kind of wisdom reflected in our scripture reading this morning. When King David died, his son Solomon took the throne when he was only 20 years old. Can you imagine? Can you imagine being the president of the United States at 20 years old? I mean, guys, our brains aren't even fully developed at that point, right? 20 years old. But he was smart enough to know that he did not have what it took to be a king at his age. He was humble enough to admit that he didn't know what he was doing, that he needed help. So he says in a prayer that Mike read this morning from 1 Kings 3, "Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among your people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong." You see what's going on here? He's asking for help. And as a result of this prayer, it goes on to say in 1 Kings 4:29, God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. You may have heard the phrase that water follows the path of least resistance, and according to the Bible, so does wisdom. The least resistance when it comes to wisdom is humility. It's the recognition that I don't have everything figured out. I don't know everything that I need to know. And this is the attitude that makes us receptive to receiving some new knowledge and insights from outside of ourselves that can help us successfully navigate the problem or situation. But without humility, there is no receptivity. And without receptivity, we cut ourselves off from the solution. Pride always results in resistance. I don't need to hear that. Solomon faced some things for which he was ill-equipped, and he decided to humble himself, to become receptive in prayer. And God answered this prayer by giving him wisdom. According to the Bible, the result was that his fame spread to all the surrounding nations. And what is surprising as we continue to read this story is that Solomon, one of the wisest people to ever walk the earth, went on to write about the importance of seeking good advice more than any other biblical writer. He's the one that talks the most about listening. He's the one that talks the most about the consequences of resisting wise counsel, more than any other biblical writer. You would think that it would be the opposite, right? You'd think that he'd be the one dishing out the advice, but instead he's talking about the importance of seeking advice. Tradition says that Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs, and we read in Proverbs 9:9, "Instruct the wise, and they will be wiser still." In other words, you are never so smart that you can't benefit from listening to others. There's a few people in my life that I wish were present here this morning to hear that. You're never too smart to benefit from listening to others. A wise person is a lifelong learner. They never say, oh, I've arrived, I figured it out, that's the last book that I need to read, that's the last conversation I need to have with my therapist, that's the last support group meeting I need to attend, I have arrived. If anybody says that, you can guarantee they're not wise. Because wisdom tells us that we are to be lifelong learners. It also says in Proverbs 1:5, a wise person will hear and increase in learning, and a person of understanding will acquire wise counsel. A wise person doesn't just receive feedback when given. A wise person seeks it out. Are you awake, church? If you were a high-level leader in the community, in business, and nonprofit, you had to figure this out before you got to where you are right now, right? It's not just that I have an open door policy so that if you need to come and share some feedback with me, I'll receive it. It's that I go to people and say, I cherish your feedback. I need your feedback. If you really care about me, if you really care about this organization, you are going to come and tell me the truth. You're going to tell me things that I don't want to hear. If you don't care about me and you don't care about this organization, you will protect yourself by telling me what you think I want to hear to avoid conflict while the thing is spinning out of control. I need your feedback. And so we not only encourage people, we give people the safety and the freedom and the encouragement and the inspiration to come and tell us things that are hard for us to hear. That's what wise people do. No one needs to offer unsolicited advice or try to force us to listen to good counsel, because wise people seek it out and they invite it in. And the final point that I want to make this morning is that when we don't want feedback, advice, or counsel, it's usually when we need it the most. Think again of those times when a loved one was about to make a bad decision and you tried to give them advice. But when they needed it the most, they didn't want it, and perhaps even got angry with you for trying to give it. And because we need it the most when we don't want it, it seems to be a universal temptation for us to rebuff wise counsel during the most critical time of our lives. It says in Proverbs 12:15, the way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a person who listens to advice is wise. When we need it the most, we don't want it because in our own eyes, we're already right. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to go to couples counseling. I don't want to go to therapy. I don't want coaching. I don't want to read the book or article. I don't want to go to that 12-step group. I don't want to take the class. I don't want to talk about it. These are the things that a fool says. But a person who listens to advice, who seeks out and welcomes feedback, especially when they don't want it, is counted among the wise. So I want to ask you a question this morning, and this is where I want it to be really personal, right? Now, at this point in the message, it's always really easy to be thinking about how you're going to leave church and take what you've learned and explain it to the person sitting next to you in the service, or to your boss, or back to your kids. And I want you to refrain from that temptation, and I want you to focus only on yourself, because that's what wise people do, right? If you remember last Sunday, we said that one of the definitions of a fool is someone who cannot focus on their self, who cannot own their own part, who can't really have the courage and the strength and the hope to do the things that they need to do, because they're always focused on my circumstances are the reason why this is happening, or these other people are the reason why this is happening, or the culture is the reason why this is happening. We can have 100 excuses to not own our part and actually get the insight and do anything about it. And the Bible says that's a definition of a fool. And so don't do that today. I implore you. Rather, focus on yourself and ask this question. Are you in a season of life, in your marriage, your dating relationship, your kids, your health, your finances, your job, your education, some area of life where you need wise counsel, but you don't want it and you're avoiding it? Or consider this. Is there something that you were planning to do that you were not sharing with other people because you don't want feedback? Is there something that you're planning to do that you were keeping a secret because you don't want someone else to give you feedback? Because you think that you already know what they're going to say, and you just don't want to hear it. If the answer to either one of these questions is yes, then you are masterminding your own regret. Are you awake? You are masterminding your own regret. And it will not be an accident, my friends. It is planned. It is strategic. Step 1, I have a bad idea. Step 2, I'm not going to tell anyone. Step 3, I'm going to do what I want to do. And so it shouldn't be a surprise. You will be masterminding your own regret. And listen, this may be really hard for you to hear from me this morning, but if you take this approach, you are being selfish. And I'm going to tell you why. You might not want to be selfish, but you are being selfish once you make that bad decision, because the negative consequences are not only going to affect you. This is what we talked about last Sunday in the sermon, Connecting the Dots. We might like to think that I'm going to make this decision and I'm only going to be hurting myself, but human beings exist in a complex network of relationships, and you never, ever, ever make a decision in isolation. If there's a person in the world that loves you and cares about you, they are going to suffer the consequences as well, even if they're a different set of consequences. It's going to impact everyone around you, especially the people who love you the most. Are you awake, church? Especially the people who depend on you. Especially the people who look up to you. You know, when I was training to be a pastor, we had to have these special trainings at the center in Leesburg. And there was one session on what happens when a pastor makes immoral decisions in a church and the church finds out. I'm off script, but this is something that I'll never forget. And the speaker, the whole time for like 3 days, she's drinking coffee out of this beautiful mug. And then on the last day, toward the end, she says, I want to talk about what happens to your congregation when you have a moral failing, when you have an affair, when you steal money, when you do these things. And as she's talking, she takes the cup and slams it on the ground, and it breaks into a million little pieces. Thank goodness she was pretending to drink out of it. There was nothing in it. And then she said, I want you to look, because that will be your congregation. These are the people who are depending on you. These are the people who are looking up to you as their spiritual leader. And that's what's going to happen to them, because you are living into this high calling. And then she went on to say, and you'll never, ever, ever be able to put that cup back together the exact way that it was. You can't do it. It's impossible. The only thing that you can do is pick up the pieces and try to create a mural with something new. And then all of us picked up a piece. We wrote our initials on it. We took glue and we glued it on a canvas to create a new picture. Not the same one, because it'll never be the same. And not an image without sharp edges that continue to hurt, but hopefully something new, something beautiful. Friends, when you have a moral failing, when you do not exercise wisdom, it hurts other people, and it hurts the people who depend on you the most. It hurts the people that look up to you the most. The people who don't sleep very well when something is going on with you that is causing pain. And to not factor this into your decision making is selfish. To not listen and play it forward is selfish. And not just selfish, but foolish, because it fails to acknowledge how your decisions today will affect your tomorrow and the tomorrow of others. So what are you intending to do that you are keeping a secret because you don't want someone to give you feedback? It says in Proverbs 15:22, which will be on the screen behind me, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed. So what do you want to succeed in this morning? Are you awake, church? I hope that you will personalize this. Do you want to succeed in your marriage? That's a noble goal. Do you want to succeed as a parent or a grandparent? Do you want to succeed in maintaining a relationship with your extended family as you get older? Do you want to maintain a relationship with your adult children? Do you want to be successful in that? Do you want to be successful in business or in your finances? Well, this is where you need good feedback from many, somebody say many advisors. And in fact, the higher the stakes, the more wise counsel you need to seek out and invite in. But all of this requires us to listen to things that we don't want to hear, but that we need to hear. And the most foolish thing that you can do, my friends, is to make people afraid of telling you the truth. And when you do this, the person that hurts the most is you, because you remain stuck in your blind spots and you're masterminding your own regret. So I want to end this morning really quickly with 4 things that I hope will help you to be a better listener. First, judge feedback on its merit, not on its source. This is sometimes counterintuitive, but don't immediately dismiss what someone says simply because of who they are. This is what drives cancel culture, right? And wisdom says we need to resist cancel culture, and it happens on both sides, right? There are progressives that do it to conservatives and conservatives that do it to progressives, and there's people in the public. It's just, you have to resist it because you don't want to immediately dismiss what someone says simply because of who they are. So, for example, you can't say, how can he tell me how to manage my money because he filed for bankruptcy 10 years ago? Or how dare she tell me how to raise my kids because her teenagers went off the rails a few years ago? There's an old saying that has served me very well in life. I read it in a book, but I can't remember the title. But it says, chew up the meat and spit out the bones. You ever heard that? Chew up the meat and spit out the bones. Some people are wise and they give you advice. It's like a big juicy steak and you savor it. You chew on it and just delight in it. And there are other people, and you know who they are, whose advice is like a gigantic bone of a turkey leg with a teeny tiny morsel of meat on it. And you gotta be careful not to choke on it. Right? But wise people understand that morsel from someone that they don't like could actually be helpful. Unwise people can give good advice. Jerks can give good advice. People that you don't like can give good advice. Bad people can give good advice, especially if they're drawing on their past and sharing a mistake that they've learned from. So judge the advice on the merit, not simply on the source. And if it turns out to be bad advice, then just let it go. Because if you have good boundaries, which we're talking about on Wednesday night if you want to join us, if you have good boundaries, it's not going to hurt you to simply listen, even if they're wrong. Second, don't assume that expertise in one area makes you an expert in every area. Some people who are successful in business are not good in marriage, and you should not seek their marriage advice. And some people are good at marriage, but they're not very good at parenting. This means that there is a danger in assuming that because you are successful in one area of your life, that you will naturally be successful in all areas of life and do not need help with anything. And accepting this fact of human existence requires humility. Third, don't confuse experience with insight. Just because someone is old doesn't mean they're wise. Someone might say, well, I've been around the block a time or two, and well, great, right? Who cares how many times you've been around the block? I mean, if you're still making the same mistake every time you go around the block, then you might have a lot of experience, but you don't have any wisdom. So you want to seek counsel from people with insight, right? Because experience alone does not make anyone wise. Rather, it is evaluated experience, integrated experience that makes someone wise. So you want to seek counsel from people with insight, not just because they're advanced in age. Finally, listen for the internal voice that says, I know, I don't need to hear that. Stop talking. Because again, when you say, I know, what you're really saying to the other person is, shut up, shut up. I mean, if we're being honest, right? You're refusing to open yourself to feedback in a specific area. And this is foolish because knowing without doing is foolish. And you are masterminding your own regret. And when you have that voice that says, I know, I don't want to listen, you need to pay attention to that tension and begin to ask yourself those questions that we've already talked about. What's really going on inside of me? Why is this so triggering to me? And remembering that that's probably when you need the insight the most. And so my hope for you today, my friends, is that you will listen to this message and that you will act with wisdom by seeking out good feedback, wise counsel from people who love you, from people who have your best interest at heart, from people who are worthy of your trust. And I promise you, you will be glad that you did.